work session to order. Today is Monday, June 6th. And in the boardroom, we have members Donnelly, Higgins, Jacobs, and Bellamy. Online, we have member Lessons, and I will update as the other board members log on or enter the room. In addition, we have Dr. Bishop. We have our guest, Heather Breaks today, as well as a great group of leaders over in the gallery. So welcome, everybody. First, we'd like to do our RFIs. So Katie, when you're ready, you'll pull those up.
This was one from Kelly that was, we didn't review last time.
So the number one is the 2022, Finance Committee update in ASD Connect. Is that the first one?
That was from Kelly.
Oh, from Kelly. Okay, so member Lessons, do you want to speak to your RFI?
Sure, this came from a member of the community at one of my recent community council meetings. A lot of folks are aware of the upcoming fiscal cliff, and I said, well, what would be a good form of communication? And through a little back and forth dialogue, it occurred to me that ASD Connect is a really ideal vehicle that already exists. And if we could add additional month-to-month updates on what we as a board, as an administration are doing, I think that's useful information. So that's where that came from.
Okay, is there a second board member interested in this? Member Higgins is also interested. So first of all, I want to know, Dr. Bishop, do you have any thoughts on?
Sure. Madam President, yes, we think that this is also a good idea. It's just we want to let the board know that the publication of ASD Connect and your monthly finance might not meet up exactly, so there might be new information, but that's happens with bond information and others. So we'll try to hold it, and it'll be the most update at the first meeting, but by the time you get to 2 meetings out, it may not be updated. And so we wouldn't want to put something that we had not already shared with the board and the finance in there. So, whether it happens at the finance committee meeting or at the board meeting, Jim says he's happy to have a brief synopsis, but please know that it's dynamic.
Okay, so it could come after a board meeting or it could come after.
Correct. Mr. Anderson, did I communicate that? So easily done. It's just that we want to have eyes wide open that the information and the work changes faster than finance committee meetings and those,
okay,
especially during times of budget season.
We're basically looking at information from our finance committee meetings as well as our regular.
Correct.
meetings.
If we do a board update here, a budget update, we would also provide that.
That's correct. I mean, a good example is daily attendance and projected enrollment. If we just briefed the board 10 days earlier, and now we put out an ASD Connect, a different number, we have to make a conscious decision as to whether to use old data just because the board hasn't been updated yet.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, now the public is going to see 2 days later a completely different number right after we just gave them that number. And so anytime you have something where we certainly try to inform the board first, but we don't have board meetings. And I'm not asking for a daily board meeting.
We can do a disclaimer on there that says subject to as information.
Or maybe we can say as of whatever date, something.
Yeah.
So, but I hear what you're saying. Okay. All righty. Any other questions, Member Higgins?
Yeah, I just want to make one comment from the standpoint of anybody public watching it at this point. I don't know if it's watched that much. At one time, a lot of the discussion that took place in the finance committee used to take place on a full board meeting, but all the board members are showing up for these committee meetings, so it's being effective. We're not leaving anyone out that way in that sense, but the public's not getting a chance to see it as much. So I really applaud this approach to provide updates like this, because it is pretty Meaningful information. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Member Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam President. So I guess a question for maybe staff and Member Lessons, the facilitator of the request. I know there are some months that the Finance Committee's drilled in on one particular topic, but there might be a relevant update. And so I guess, are we, through this request, would we also be allowing staff to facilitate whatever the most meaningful topic at the time that the documentation is issued, that newsletter is issued, or does it have to come from a committee meeting? Because I think that as long as it's the most relevant content, I think that's what I think would be most valuable. But I love the idea.
So if I'm understanding your question, to paraphrase, are we looking at committee meeting business, or can there be other updates?
Yeah, that's really it. Is does it have to be on the, if there's a really relevant and timely update at the time the newsletter is issued? Even if it's not on the agenda, I would like to see it added.
Sure.
That's my only point.
Madam President, anything that's really benign and just updated, we would, but many of the budgetary decisions and updates that probably the public's most interested in are going to be controversial. In fact, for the reason that they brought it up about having some financial constraints. And so I would recommend that nothing is shared publicly without the board notification first and understanding of it. But things that are just information that is going to help our public better understand the workings of the school district, absolutely. But if there were major decisions that could affect many times, I mean, even say we're thinking about closing some schools, and we're doing, like we have had that as something known, talked to board, but we haven't said names of school, and because that's the next thing, just because we will panic our employees, we will panic families, that there is a manner in which we engage the community to understand the why behind the information, so that it isn't just, feeling like shot from the hip. And I think that's what Jim was trying to convey. Like, there's some information that's real easy, but others that could elicit some feedback that would be unfortunate, not having a whole picture at the board level first. But I would leave it to the professionals who would know that. Jim would know that. Mr. Anderson, correct?
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? We have a couple more to do. So in terms of timeline, short term, immediate, I'd say short term, which gives us, and I guess, MJ, do you have Dr. Bishop? Yeah.
Madam President, the work is really with Mr. Anderson. Okay. The communications would publish it, but the work would be Mr. Anderson and his team, so I'll defer to him.
Thank you.
I think what the board's going to see is we're going to have a lot of public information and board briefings starting in August as we slow roll out between August and December. All of the possible options to avoid a FY24 fiscal cliff, and we want it to be public. So I certainly agree. It's just is it doable soon was the question. Mm-hmm. Like when we know it, can we start with the next one that comes out in August? Do you feel as though that could be? I assume that we would be ready to start in August because I planned on briefing it at the second August board meeting. Okay. Either in a board connect or a finance meeting shortly after. So yes, ma'am. All right. That's great. So that would be, that's really, it's not immediate, but it's time specific. August board meeting, second board meeting in August. Yeah. Ask me if you prefer. Your choice. Or would you prefer September? I think we'll be able to give the projected deficit by August. We'll already have a decent idea on projected enrollment at that point to be able to identify what we believe the FY24 deficit will be. And I think it's a good time to start the conversation about we're going to have to make decisions by January and February, knowing that the legislature will still have from February to May to make other decisions that will happen after our budget gets passed. Okay, thank you. So the more we socialize it, the better.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Madam President. And I'll add that the superintendent, Dr. Bryant, as well as Mr. Anderson and MJ Tim, they'll not only for the community council, but they will also, because this is going to be significant, have a comms plan for the entire proposal. And they're literally working on it now. They are creating graphs and charts and everything to visually understand what's happening. So even bigger than the community council is their work.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. All righty, so that has a date of August. The next one is preschool transportation and meals. Let's see, who was that? Jacobs? Was that you?
Yes, Madam President. This was actually a request that occurred at our most recent joint meeting with the Assembly. Was looking for, I believe, member Assemblywoman Zolotel was seeking additional information, which to me makes sense in terms of a request as to how we intend to implement the 0.5 allocation coming from the most recent legislative session and how that will change programs that we have in place. And so whether that occurs inside a finance committee meeting or through the RFI process, I'm indifferent.
Dr. Bishop.
Thank you. I was going to initially publish our director, Chelsea Morrow, at the beginning of the year when you and I had a meeting with member lessons. We shared, so we were going to share some of those data that we already have, and then we can share the plan for the new, and so that we know the 0.5 is a slow rollout of funds over time. But the school districts who have, my understanding, I think, Jim, the school districts that have competed for the pre-K grant will be the priority for the 0.5 because we're already approved because all of the 0.5 pre-K funds are with approved preschools that they're saying are, that they want to fund. So I know that the entire state and the funding isn't there. It's a slow rollout over time, but we can share that. I just wanted to be realistic in the amount of money and capacity that we would have to do that. And I think we can build it in time with that rollout.
Okay. So in terms of immediately. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So now that brings us to item settlement authority. Sorry, I did miss that one. Okay, this one is from member Jacobs. What is the maximum amount that can be used to settle legal challenges before board approval is needed? Where is this addressed in policy? Dr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam President. And I can share what we've determined. So we have operated on $150,000, and that's part of our, if there's lawsuits in regard to any kind of safety or other issues, that the authority that we have to go into mediation. That was derived from prior policy that was not moved over into AASB. It was collected as an AR, and we have a stack really of ARs that are going from department to department for review. So we did catch that when this request came in. And Deb Ingalls can share a little bit more if you'd like that, but it is what we did was take the policy and move it to the AR. After the guidance when the board decided to move its policy, and that along with many others, I believe Kitty Grant has, and it's one of them in there. So we can fast move that. We can, at the board's understanding, obviously if this is something that the board wants to change policy on. But at this present time, superintendent authority to work with the team to get a settlement, it can't be more than $150,000.
Member Jacobs.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the information. I was a question that came from the public that there wasn't a clear answer to in board policy and AR, so I appreciate it. I don't really have as long as the administration's adhering to that guideline, I don't know that I have a preference as to when that AR gets implemented, but it will be helpful to have it right. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we can move that down maybe to a short term. Or do you need anything else for right now? Are you good right now?
I have the information I need.
Okay, thank you. All right, he has what he needs, so we don't need, that one is done. Next, school security staff. Member Donnelly, I believe. How many school security staff, that's non-SROs, are at our middle and high schools?
We can get that.
You can get that in the Board Connect. That was part of a conversation we had at the end of our last meeting. Thank you. And then this other one I captured from Member Donnelly. Make sure I restated it correctly. This one has to do with security. Do all schools have a single entry before, during, and after school? Which schools still need a security vestibule? Dr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam President. And the answer to the first question is no. And that is our recommendation. But is it currently practiced? We have moved to decrease entries, but they're often open depending if they're closer to a parking lot. But given the most recent circumstances, our recommendation is going to become stronger. It's coming from the safety team as well. And you are going to get a presentation during the superintendent's update on that, and then a plan for the security vestibules. And we can share how many at the elementary level. We do not create vestibules at middle and high schools. We want to move to that single point of entry.
Great. Thank you. So Member Donnelly could wait till the update. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. So that brings us, I think that's the last of our RFIs.
I haven't seen it. If it was in the Board Connect, I'm sorry I missed it. Where we were at on that ongoing question regarding how many instructors were actually received unsatisfactory evaluations. We got the number for how many were, left in a particular year.
It was in Board Connect. I can look it up. I can make.
Thank you.
Not this last one. Maybe it was the one before, but we'll get it to you.
Thank
you. All right. So
Madam President, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt. I have one more request if you have another moment.
Oh, sure.
Yep. So I had connected with Dr. Akes briefly before a work session here, and I've been trying to frame how to make the request. But at this point, I think I can, if we can add it to the list under long-term is fine for now, and I can work with the administration of Dr. Akes later as to drilling it down. But information regarding out-of-school suspensions over the last year would be helpful. Again, I can work to drill that down into specific data points with Dr. Akes afterwards.
And that was for discipline data.
Correct.
Okay. Middle and high? Or
it would be based on any out-of-school suspension.
Okay. Thank you. All righty. So that concludes. I think it is on the dashboard, but.
On the dashboard right now?
So this would, we'd be looking for additional data that isn't on the dashboard, drilling down the specifics as to the incident outside of just a general categorization. And so that's why the long-term rating, I think, is fine for now.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. That concludes our RFIs. If you have any more, please send them. And now we're going to welcome Heather. For our update, our legislative update. Thank you for being here. See the button there's a little mouthpiece on that mic. Yes.
Okay, got it. You hear me okay? All right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today just to talk through sort of an adjournment highlight or recap from the 32nd legislature, the second session of the legislature. I do have this in a written format that I'll just go through slides today, but I will forward a written format that will include probably a little more detail than I will talk through today. The first slide deck will.
Could Heather just introduce herself for the record and who she works with?
Yes, Heather, would you please, Heather Breaks, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you.
I thought everybody knew Heather. I'm sorry.
All things for me to forget. I'm always trying to tell clients, remember to introduce yourself when you're testifying. Yes, Heather Breaks. I am a lobbyist with Legislative Consultants and represent the school district in Juneau. Before the legislature and administration, executive branch.
Thank you.
So the first slide deck will just be focused mostly on budget and legislation that passed in the last few days of session. We got down to budget. Thank you. So overall for the budget is overall spending is about $17.4 billion in the state budget. Approximately $8 billion of that is general fund spending in the operating budget. The capital budget, this is the first year we've had significant amount of money allocated or appropriated for a really robust capital project bill. I think last year, including federal funds, it was only about 1.5, that's all right, 100 million, sorry. And so this year, it's been about 10 years since we've had a budget of this size. So it's fairly significant. And then you can see on the third line there, the permanent fund dividend accounts for $1.6 billion of spend this year. Thank you. This slide, I don't know how well you can see it. It doesn't seem like very well. So it just really kind of shows the differences between last year's UGF spend on operating versus this year's. And so it's just under 7 billion last year. And this year it's 8.3 billion, which is a 19.6% increase. The state forecasters continue to believe that oil prices are going to be higher than what we've seen in the past. Whether that stays at a level that will completely fund this budget as it's appropriated is a question that everyone has. So part of the focus with the legislature this year was to try to maximize, or I guess I should say restore reserves that have been spent down over the years. And so they wanted to take care of some debt. They wanted to fully fund programs and services as much as they could. They wanted to put money into savings, into these reserves, and they want to have a robust capital budget. And so what they ended up advancing in the end was a compromise on all of those things. Some people wanted to save a lot more than what you see here, and others wanted to spend more on certain sort of important projects or programs, services to them. So this in the end ended up to be a compromise. Now, I say that this is where it stands today. The governor is set to take action. His action is review mid-June, and so the legislature can't get the budget to him sooner than that, but they are right now in the process of going through that analysis on each of the appropriations that were made. So the operating budget is mostly funded. As I said, capital budget is $831 million, which is almost a 50% increase from last year. And they did put some money into supplemental spending as well. I mentioned the permanent fund dividend amount. In addition, let's see. In addition to that, I'll get to a slide in a minute here, but the budget right now is based on $101 per barrel of oil. That allowed them to put $800 million into the statutory budget reserve to try to restore that reserve account, $1.3 billion into the constitutional budget reserve, which, as you all are aware, takes a much higher threshold to access a 3/4 vote in the legislature. I believe the CBR, as the acronym for the fund, is owed about $13 billion from previous borrowing from that fund. So that is a constitutional requirement that the state repay that at the end of every fiscal year. Any money that remains in accounts that is not encumbered or set to be appropriated over the next fiscal year has to be swept into the Constitutional Budget Reserve Fund. Additionally, there's $15.6 billion in the earnings reserve account of the permanent fund. That is accessible by a simple majority vote. The legislature can access that. They are trying to not spend more than the POMV calculation, the percent of market value, which this year was about 3.1 billion. And so far, they have not violated that statutory requirement. And so that fund continues to grow and be available should it need to be. And then forward funding of K-12 and pupil transportation for FY24 is at about, I think I have a mistake on this one. $712 million for next year. They originally had it funded at the full 1.2 billion. However, during the final days of negotiations, that was reduced to make room for other items and other spending. And that is assuming that oil stays above $101 per barrel. Should it go below that, the first place that money will be drawn on is out of the forward funding of education. In addition to that, right now, the projections are the budget is balanced, if you will, at $94 per barrel of oil. So if it goes below that, they will start to drain these other reserve accounts that they can access. Okay. So the permanent fund, dividend, and energy relief, what they've ended up with, they started with a $5,500 payment to Alaskans, which was the equivalent of a full statutory permanent fund dividend and a $1,300 energy relief check. That, when negotiations began, they brought those amounts down to $25.50, which for a permanent fund dividend, that is considered the 50-50 dividend. So I know you're familiar with that. It's 50% of the POMV draw, which I stated was about 3.1 billion this year. 50% of that would go to dividends and 50% goes to fund services and construction projects. So in the end, they ended up also reducing the energy relief check or payment from $1,300 to $650. So total checks will go out this fall at $3,200. And assuming, again, that the governor keeps those amounts whole in the budget. And this just shows you this dividend of $2,550 is the largest in the state's history. You can see back in, I think it was 2008, there was a similar situation. It was more called a resource rebate that was paid out on top of the dividend. This doesn't include that $1,200 in the bar chart. So you can see that this is truly the largest dividend in state's history, aside from the energy relief assistance. Education funding. This just sort of highlights where they tried to fully fund programs and services. They tried to reimburse or make whole communities and school districts. So fully funded our K-12 and pupil transportation. School bond debt reimbursement is fully funded this year at $78.9 million. They also went back and provided an appropriation that would make whole those municipalities and school districts that utilize the school bond debt reimbursement program going back to 2017, which was the first year any portion of that in recent years had been vetoed. And so Anchorage will be getting $90 million, almost 90.5 of that appropriation. They also funded $57 million outside of the formula to be distributed to districts, and that is on it's just a one-time item at this point.
Heather, I'm sorry, we do have a question. Member Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Heather, what's the plan for how that $90,000 in former school bond debt that was paid for by the Anchorage taxpayers is going to get reimbursed?
I think that's being left up to the individual municipalities and school districts.
Sure. That might be a better question for Dr. Bishop. Member Donnelly.
Madam President, through the President to Member Donnelly, Mr. Anderson has been active with our council in debating this and ensuring that. So would you mind a brief update?
Not at all. Through the President to Member Donnelly. So for FY20 through FY22, we actually increased taxes to the taxpayers the year after in order to meet those obligations. In FY17, we did not. We used some general fund money and we used fund balance from capital. So in the FY17 money, we have to repay the fund balance that was left over in capital. And then the general fund money will come to general fund. We've been talking to legal. We are waiting for a deed, though, to provide their guidance, and they don't have it yet on the remainder. But the options, depending on who you talk to, you could, option one, hypothetically, the board would have to approve this because unlike every other district, this money comes to the district and not the municipality. The board could choose to offset taxes for the next couple years. And instead of sending a tax notice in the FY24 budget for capital, you could use this money and defer taxes for that year and pay it back that way. There are in the language some reason to believe that you could also use it for capital projects. But we really need DEED to come out with their final guidance, and they're trying to make sure it's clean and bought off by the legislative legal team as well as their own.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Go on, Heather. Continue, please.
Thank you. As I said, $57 million one-time outside the formula will be distributed to districts in FY24. Pre-K funding was increased. It's now at 5.7 million. And as I put an asterisk on the bottom there again, that 750 million for forward funding of K-12 and pupil transportation is dependent on oil prices staying over 101 or over dollars per barrel. I think some of this information I know Jim, as Mr. Anderson has shared. The capital budget also included $100 million in school major maintenance funding. They estimate that to get that this would get the project list funded from project 1 through 54 for the coming year. I have been told that, and so I've put in here just the projects that up to number 52 are Anchorage's projects. 70 and 78, I see I lost my little dividing line there. Those obviously are not included in the $100 million of funding. And I was told by legislative finance that there may be some concern. We're not sure if it's founded or not, but the amount of the estimated amount for cost for these projects may be lower than they would be today. And so they've just expressed a little note of caution on that front that while there is $100 million, assuming the governor, again, it makes it past him, it may actually be funding fewer numbers of projects, but that's not completely certain. So I just say that with a little note of caution. Legislation that passed. So this is some of the highlighted pieces of legislation that passed during session. HB 19 allows for a person with expertise in a language other than English to qualify for a limited language immersion teacher certificate without having a bachelor's degree or having completed a teacher preparation program. However, it does require the school board of the district or regional education attendance area to request an issuance of this certificate for an applicant. House Bill 53 allows military children with residency outside the state, but with documentation of a pending relocation to Alaska to access. It allows them access to the preliminary registration enrollment and application at the district at the time that is open to the general student population. House Bill 114 is the bill that incorporates on the last day of session was amended to include what we now know as Senate Bill 111 or the READS Act bill. And I understand Dr. Bishop has some information about that bill and it being signed. It really did really had three major components. It has early education as being the first component, allows districts to include students in early education programs in the foundation formula at 0.5, as you were speaking to earlier, and includes pupil transportation for those districts that provide pupil transportation. Creates a targeted grant program for low-performing school districts to help them either improve or implement an early education program. It also recodifies the Parents as Teachers program. The second major component of this bill is the reading intervention component. Establishes reading screening tools to identify students that are falling behind. Districts, directs districts to provide intervention services to those students, provides for up to 3 formative in-class screenings per year for K through 3 students, requires the department to design and develop evidence-based screening in any language, allows districts to select their own evidence-based screener, provides for culturally responsive reading interventions. This was some of these provisions were really important to especially legislators in rural districts. And so this bill, before it was amended into the bill that passed, HB 114, they were still working on some of those components and provisions to be added to the legislation all the way up until the last day of session. It also adds reading specialist positions at the department to work directly with teachers across the state in an attempt to improve the quality of reading instruction. The third major component is the Virtual Education Consortium. This was another bill that made its way into Senate Bill 111 initially, and this would provide for a statewide learning management system, a clearinghouse for professional development services, and live assistance for assistance and training for teachers. And it's really meant to not take the place of any one program that is being offered now, but to try to build on that and provide it across the state to districts. The bill, it was important for sponsors and supporters of the bill to try to maintain as much local control as possible. The programs and policies are locally designed and culturally responsive. The department provides the oversight and the support to those designed programs and policies. There is a component that requires the annual reports to the legislature and a stakeholder group that will provide insight and feedback on an annual basis, both to the board, the department, and the legislature. The three components that I just spoke to, the major components of the bill will be sunset in 2034 unless the legislature chooses to extend them at that point. And that was a compromise that was made due to the increased cost of the bill and the programs contained in it. The bill also provides for a $30 per student VSA increase, which is an equivalent to about $7.6 million in additional spending per year. I'm told the reason that it ended up at $30 per student is you'll remember that the House Representative Story had two bills, House Bill 272 and House Bill 273, that would have provided for an increase, 2-year step, and then inflation proof it, basically. It would be tied to indexing. Those bills never passed the House. And so because they didn't pass the House, they didn't even have a vote. They just never made it to the floor. But because they were not in the Senate, it made it very difficult to negotiate from zero up instead of from what those bills contained down. And so $30 was the most that they could negotiate to get at that point. I believe this will be back before the legislature again next year. And so that's something that we'll be working on again in the next session. I put House Bill 322 on here. It's not a direct impact to the district. However, this is the Higher Education Fund is the revenue source for funding performance scholarships, merit-based scholarships, and the WWAMI program for students that are going to attend the medical school. This bill I spoke to the constitutional budget reserve sweep at the end of the fiscal year, and typically the legislature also at the same time they pass the bill, they put a provision in that reverses that sweep and puts those funds back into the funds that they were set up to fund certain programs and services. Last year, they did not reach the necessary 3/4 vote to get the reverse sweep. And so the higher education fund was depleted. It went into the constitutional budget reserve fund and the balance is there. However, the legislature did choose to recapitalize that fund in the budget bill. So I believe it was about $349 million will be going back into that fund. This bill removes the fund altogether from the requirement of the initial sweep. So should the governor sign this bill, it will protect that fund from being swept in the future. It got amended into House Bill 322, but it was originally Representative Andy Josephson's bill that contained those provisions. Senate Bill 20 is the out-of-state teacher reciprocity bill that allows an educator with a valid teaching certificate from out of state to qualify for a regular certificate as long as they're in good standing with an out-of-state teaching certificate. They have a bachelor's degree and they pass a criminal history background check. They would not be required to pass the competency or content area exam, but would have 2 years to satisfy the Alaska Studies and multicultural coursework. And so it also was amended to include a provision that requires the Department of Education to adopt a process to expedite issuance of these certificates to spouses of active duty military members. House Bill 34 is the State Tribal Education Compact bill, and this really directs, it's sort of a pilot project that's being set up with a 5-year term, and it's directing the department again to negotiate with federally recognized tribes on establishing 5 demonstration state/tribal education compact schools that would be able to operate for 5 years. And then again, the legislature would come back to revisit that and see how that process is going. Of course, they could revisit it earlier if they wanted to, but Senate Bill 174 is a bill that prohibits a district from adopting a school dress code that would prevent a student from wearing a hairstyle that's associated with race, prohibits a student from wearing a natural hairstyle regardless of the student's hair texture or type, requires a student to permanently or semi-permanently alter the student's natural hair, or prohibits a student from wearing traditional tribal regalia or objects of cultural significance at a graduation ceremony. I think that was added late in the process, or along the way, I guess. It does allows the school district to restrict those things to comply with health and safety laws, regulations, or ordinances. Legislation that did not pass. You might have heard in the last, probably the last half of session, two bills were introduced that would have disallowed students, or I say it this way, allow students to participate in school-sponsored sports based on their sex at birth. And the House bill was not heard. The Senate bill moved. There were several attempts to have it pulled out of committee. which were successful. And Senate Bill 140 was on the floor during the last few days of session, but did not pass. The sponsors of the bill did not want to have any amendments made to it, and so they it was tabled in the very end.
We have about 10 minutes left here,
Oh,
just so you
dear.
can.
Okay, well, I've been. I'll hurry up here. School bond debt reimbursement moratorium did not pass, and bills that pertain to defined benefit, reestablishing that program for school districts and for teachers and public employees did not pass. I'm going to switch now to the other slide deck and just go through a few of these, and then I will make both of these available so you can look at them and see the candidates and the races coming up. So for the 33rd,
There we go.
I'm really interested in our top objectives, our top legislative goals. And if you don't have that included in this, I would really like to see a presentation that covered what our district's top priorities were and what
You mean our legislative priorities?
our legislative priorities.
okay.
Okay, thank you.
I have that in the written,
She's going to have a,
that's more detailed.
Thank you.
But I can do a presentation again as well, but I have that in the written.
It's in the written. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So pivoting to the elections for the coming year, as you all know, redistricting occurred. There were several challenges to that, and it was litigated. The court decided on the plan that was ultimately adopted. District lines are drawn, and the filing deadline for the coming elections was 5 p.m. on June 1st. There are, because of the plan that was adopted, 59 of the 60 seats in the legislature will appear on the ballot this year. The only one is Senator Donnie Olson from Northwest and North Slope, who won't be up for election. Due to a lot of folks retiring, redistricting, and legislators running for other offices, we expect the legislature will look significantly different next year. 7 races are uncontested. 6 of those seats are incumbents. 22 races have only 2 candidates. 18 races have 3, 11 have 4, and 1 race has 5. That is Representative Will's district in Fairbanks. The House of Representatives, currently you're aware of the makeup. The House will have a minimum of 15 new members next year, which is 37.5% turnover. However, that's expected to be higher due to some very competitive races that folks have registered for. I will go to the Senate. Just trying to keep track of time here. The Senate currently has 13 Republicans, 7 Democrats. They traditionally have a much lower rate of turnover. However, again, for the reasons mentioned, there will be at least a 25% turnover in the members themselves. And additionally, there's an open Senate district that Representative Garantar and Assemblyman Dunbar and some others have signed up to run in that district too. So due to, on top of the redistricting, as you all are aware, we adopted the ranked choice voting scheme, in Alaska, this will be the first year that we go through that process. And so we'll see a lot of interesting, sort of see how things shake out in this first run through. So how that works is in the primary, you vote for one person. The top 4 vote getters will advance to the November general election. And we only have one of those, House District 35, which is Representative Wool's district, current district, has 5 members. So one of those candidates will not advance, but 4 will. Let's see. Yeah. And I'm gonna just wait for some questions. If I will send the this PowerPoint out. It shows each of the districts across the state, but starting on slide 12, it will show all of the districts in Anchorage and the members who have candidates who have filed to run for those districts. And you can go through to see incumbents and new challengers that will appear on the ballot.
Okay, questions? Thank you, Heather. Member Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam President. And I appreciate all the information, Heather, and then your advocacy over the last session. The $30 BSA increase, we talked about how the negotiation played that out. Was there data supporting that number?
I don't believe so. I think that was just the highest dollar amount that they were able to negotiate.
Can I follow up, Madam President?
Sure.
And then tangentially related, is there any discussion at this point about, any word about vetoes at this point from the executive branch?
In terms of funding, I think that the governor is going to make some cuts. I think that he will need to do that, and he's sort of signaled that he will be doing that. Where those will fall, I don't have a good sense of. One thing that Senator Begich and others who were working with the governor on the READS Act bill had vocalized is, unless the READS Act passed, the governor was not likely to approve additional funding, school funding, until he got that component. And so those were negotiations that were ongoing with Senator Begich and the governor and others on the finance committee. So I would hesitate to say that he's not going to veto anything, but I know that getting this bill in over the finish line was really important to him, and so he was working towards that end.
Okay. Other questions for Heather? Okay, well, Heather, thank you very much, and we'll get the resources. If you'll send them to Katie, then we can get them out to the board.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure, no more questions for Heather before she leaves. You got like 2 minutes.
Well, Madam President, I have one if we have time.
Okay, I think we have time for one more.
All right. We talked about House Bill 272, 273 didn't pass the House, and that affected negotiations for what the READS Act looked like. It seemed like it passed out of finance, I recall. Why did it stall after that? Do we have any sense?
It's not clear. I think there were the votes in the House to pass it. And so I don't know if in the end there were some, because of the way that the budget negotiations were happening and really stalled everything out in the last couple weeks of session over the size of the dividend and the additional energy rebate and other items. They were at one point believing they were going to have to go into a special session or extended session because they weren't going to get to resolution on that. And so it really caused a lot of legislation to not get over the finish line that would have otherwise. And the House, additionally, the House has a has a challenge moving legislation on their floor, given the thin margin of between the minority and majority, and they have a very difficult time moving. And so that added to the challenge of getting those pieces of legislation over.
Member Donnelly, did you have a thought?
Yeah, as you were working, lobbying towards getting the update to the school, the district cost differential study funded, which was like $145,000. Who was the biggest opposition to that?
There wasn't a lot of support for it, and we tried to work as many districts did to try to get that included. And so there wasn't any one person or a large number, or I'm sorry, there wasn't really one or a few that were opposed to it. It just wasn't a priority for them in the end. There was a lot of work going into trying to get that through.
Okay. All righty. So I'd like to thank you, Heather. I'd like the record to show that members Holloman, Wilson, and Lessons are online. And at this point, now he's in. Now, at this point, we need to move into executive session for the purpose of legal updates.
So moved, Madam President.
Is there a second? All right. We are now into executive session. Thank